Christ Community Church, located at 25th and Thomas Avenue in Portsmouth, Ohio.
Please give a big Christ Community Church welcome to Detective J. Warner Wallace.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I think you guys should get like extra credit for coming to church on a sunny afternoon on a Saturday. Don't you think you should get extra credit? What great weather I had come out this time. It's not always the case, right? In certain times of the year, it's not as good as others. And I just came from Southern California where it's always 75 and dry. But it's kind of the same way here right now. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some evidence that I think will help you to have confidence that Christianity is true. That was a big challenge for me when I first started looking at Christianity because I was 35 and I had a background working cold case investigations. At the time, I was actually working undercover as part of an undercover team. And I remember thinking that the Christians that I knew typically fell into two groups. They were either the officers that I knew, who if you asked them, why is Christianity true? They couldn't always give you great reasons. I mean, I could push back just a little bit, and they would kind of be like flat-footed about how they would respond. Now, they had a great ability to make the case evidentially for a particular suspect we might be working. But if you asked them, well, give me 5 reasons why I can trust the Gospels, they couldn't really respond as well. And I thought, Now, the other group of Christians that I knew were the people we were taking to jail. Because a lot of those folks would tell us that they were Christians. So I thought if I have to be one of these two groups, either a group of Christians that can't defend what they believe, or a group of Christians who won't live like it actually is true, I didn't want any part of it. But at some point, my wife convinced me to go to church and examine the Gospels. Now, she wasn't even aware if the Gospels were true herself, but she was at least interested in going to church. So we did. Now, as a result of that, we became Christians. My son is a Christian also. He was raised in the church. I wasn't raised in the church. My dad is still a very committed atheist. I was the only Christian in my family at the age of 35. But this kid now has been raised, and he is using the same tools that I used before him, and he's wearing the same uniform that I wore for years. He's got the same name that I have, right? His name is Jim Wallace. We aren't very creative when it comes to names. As a matter of fact, I always say that we're the George Foreman of law enforcement, right? If you know George Foreman, he had 6 boys, and they are all named George Foreman, that's right. So he's wearing the same tools, using the same tools, wearing the same patches that I was wearing before him. I did the same thing my dad did. His name is also Jim Wallace, so we're not very, 56 years at our agency. If you call the station and you ask for Jim Wallace, there's been somebody there to answer the phone. Now, what I'm going to do is share with you, yes, I did bring books, but as an atheist all those years, I hated the fact that Christians were always selling something. Now, God's got a sense of humor, right? Because years later, here I am as a Christian who's selling something. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because this is one of the few churches in the entire state, did you know that has an interest in equipping you to know why this is true. It's not easy to find a church that's even willing to do that. You know, I wrote a book on the case for Christianity and a book on the case for God's existence, and I just finished a book on the case for making a case. You know why? Because a lot of us don't even think there's a need to make a case. That's sad, if you think about it. Now, I was asked last year to do a real quick scene in a movie called God's Not Dead 2. 6 minutes to make the case for why I think the Gospels are reliable. Now, this was originally a 12-minute scene, but it got edited to 6. And I thought afterwards, you know how hard it is to figure out what 6 minutes you should use? Right? You might know a lot about Christianity. Even you might know a lot about Christianity, but you're not always quite sure which 6 minutes you should share with somebody. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is to give you some material that I actually have written about in both my books and also at a website called coldcasechristianity.com. This is a resource that I've wanted to be free from the beginning. Every page is downloadable as a PDF file for free. And we have a phone app in which everything that's at the website is available to you for free from your phone, including a video of tonight's presentation. All of it is available for you to watch from your phone for free. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards to ask questions, the best way to do it is through social media, okay? And I'm on every platform. Now, that being said, I'm not kidding when I tell you how fortunate you are. This is my second time working with you guys here in the state of Ohio. And you're about to enter into a series called Jesus According To. That starts next week. I kind of see this talk tonight as the first talk in that series. Because what Matt's going to do is he's going to look at all the different ways, different worldviews think about Jesus. Whether they deny he's who he says he was, whether they agree, how they do agree, how they disagree, including an atheistic worldview, including kind of a New Age worldview, including the Muslim worldview. You're going to get a chance to look at all of those over the next 4 weeks. Tonight, I want to try to knock down a few atheist objections that I held before I became a Christian. And they really centered on one issue, the issue of the resurrection of Jesus. You know, think about that. That's a game changer, right? Buddha did not claim to rise from the dead. Either did Confucius, Baha'u'llah, Muhammad. None of these folks claim to rise from the dead. This is a way that Jesus is very distinct from other religious, classic, historic religious world leaders, right? And this is very different. So I wanted to look at that one issue, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. Now, I will tell you that you've got to keep your, whatever you think you know about Jesus, if you're in this room because you've got a spouse who makes you come, or you're in this room because you heard I was going to be here and you don't even believe this is true, fine, great, I'm glad you're here. But remember, we all start off with biases and presuppositions, and those can be a problem. We get called out all the time to death scenes in my city, but not every death scene is a crime scene because there are 4 ways to die. Now, I will tell you, when you get there, you got to figure out what you got. Recently, we had somebody called out, and we knew this lady for a number of years. She was a very committed drug addict in our city, and she was a heroin user, and she was reportedly dead in her bedroom, lying on her bed. When we got there, this was her nightstand. I'll give it to you a little bit closer. So this was her nightstand. And if you look closely, you'll see there are a couple of heroin needles here. This is her own blood. Heroin needle here, heroin needle here. She's cooking on the bottom of that can. She's using that water to cook. And the needle, she's drawing the heroin once it's prepared out of that spoon. Now, of course, she had a hard time functioning as a committed heroin user who used it every day, a couple times a day. So she would smoke rock cocaine to kind of balance herself, one up, one down. And so these are her rock pipes. You can see them. This is her nightstand, folks. So think about this. If you were dispatched to this call and you knew that she's a committed drug addict and now she's dead in her bed, what do you presume is the cause of death? Overdose, right? That seems reasonable. So the officers, they get there. They don't even bother to pull down the covers. They call the coroner's investigator out because we have a suspicious death, an overdose. The coroner's investigator takes a while to get there in Los Angeles County, but it finally gets there, pulls down the blankets, and she's been stabbed to death. So it's not an overdose, but they didn't bother to look because they had a presupposition based on their prior experience with her. And then that presupposition caused them to see this evidence and evaluate it in a certain way. And if you're not careful, your presuppositions will cause you to misinterpret evidence. Ignore some evidences that are important. Not even bother to pull the blankets down. What's the point? I already know the answer. Really? Well, you were wrong. So I thought, okay, just keep that in mind. All we're doing at these scenes is trying to figure out what the most reasonable inference is from evidence, because the standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt. If that was the case, you'd never convict anybody. It's not beyond a possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. Does that make sense? There are always possible doubts. It's possible you're not even here right now. You've been in bed all day long sleeping in, and you've imagined this entire day. You've dreamt the entire day. It's possible this is all just some computer simulation. It's possible we're in the Matrix and you just haven't taken the pill yet. All of those things are possible, but none of those things are reasonable, so that's the standard we're really after. It's reasonable doubt. Now, how do we determine what's reasonable and separate what's reasonable from just what's possible? Well, that's what I want to teach you. In order to do this, we're going to look at a death scene together. So here we go. Here's a death scene, a guy laying face down on the ground. Looks suspiciously like my son, Jimmy. Pay no attention to that. But how do I know if this is a crime scene? It's certainly a death scene. All I have is some small pieces of evidence. What we do at every death scene is we make a list, 2 lists, a list of all the evidences on one side, a list of all the explanations for the evidences on the other side, and then we try to figure out which explanation is most reasonable in light of the evidence. So far, if we made a list over here, we put all the evidence here, put all the explanations over there. All we have in terms of evidence is a dead guy laying face down. Well, how do I explain dead guys laying face down? Well, there are 4 ways to do that. It could have been a natural death. He could have accidentally died somehow. He could have committed suicide. Or he could have been murdered. Now, I would be investigating this, but I don't really care if it's one of these three, I hate to tell you. As a matter of fact, I hope it's one of these three so I can go home. But if it's not, I have to stay all night, so I'm really hoping it's one of these three. Now, what I have so far is a dead guy laying face down. Can I cross out any of those explanations given what I have so far? You guys can actually yell it out from the back if you want. Which explanation can I cross out? Yell it. Yeah, none, right? Because if he died of a heart attack, he would look like this. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like this. If he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like this. If I poisoned him with too many pills, he would look like this. Make sense? For as it is now, I can't cross out anything. Let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down, but now he's in a pool of his own blood, center torso? Center torso. I think that would change things. If we added that to our list, pool of blood, center torso, well, now I think it's reasonable for us to cross out natural. Now, it's still possible, but think about that. Where can you bleed from naturally? What opening can you bleed from naturally at center torso? It's not around his head, it's around his center torso. So I think we can cross that out. But I really can't cross out anything else until I roll him over, right? Okay, let's change the scenario. What if he's a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood, but now he's got a big knife stuck in his back? Would that change things? I think it would. Let's add that to our list, big knife in his back. Now, can I cross out anything? I mean, I think that it's hard to imagine how he could accidentally plunge that knife into his back, right? So I think, although it's still possible, I could rule that out. Now, I think many of you already are ready to rule. This could still be a suicide or a homicide, though. I could even do that, and I'm pretty stiff. So let's change our scenario. What if he is a dead guy laying face down in a pool of his own blood with a knife in his back, but now he's got multiple stab wounds all over his back? Come on, that's getting harder to explain. Would you agree? So now, I think we can rule out that it's a suicide. It's kind of hard to even do that. How would he do that? Unless he's incredibly flexible, has a high tolerance for pain, good chance he didn't do that to himself. Would you agree? As a matter of fact, if I added one more thing, what if he had bloody footprints leaving the room? I think now we can say, okay, this is clearly in the fourth category. And that's how we do this, by the way. And no one had to die. Jimmy's still alive, okay? UCLA is playing today. I'm not even sure if they won today. I've been here all day. But USC lost last night. Did you guys see that? You guys have no idea who UCLA and USC are here, do you? All you guys care about is Ohio State, I bet, right? All right. Now, in the book, I describe it this way. This is how I drew it in the book. You got a dead guy. This is called abductive reasoning, or inferring to the most reasonable explanation. This is a valid way of determining which explanation is the best for any set of phenomena, including what happens at death scenes. So I started asking the question as a guy who was looking at the Gospels for the first time, could I apply this thinking to the empty tomb? Could I apply this approach to the death and resurrection of Jesus? After all, you know that Paul says this is the most important piece of information, the most important piece of evidence in the entire Christian worldview. Paul says if this isn't true, you have no hope of a life after death because Jesus didn't rise after the grave. And worse than that, we have been lying to you and you bought it. We are false witnesses, he says. We are liars. This is an important piece of evidence, the resurrection of Jesus. Let's use abductive reasoning to see if your Christian explanation is the best way to describe the evidence in the room. Now, what would we count as evidence? What could we list here? Well, I'll tell you the 4 things that I would have given you as an atheist. There were 4 things that as an atheist, I would have said to you were true about the resurrection, even though I didn't believe Christianity was true. As a matter of fact, a guy named Gary Habermas has done a good job of assembling these kinds of claims. But I'll just tell you what I would have said as an atheist. I would have said, I believe that Jesus was crucified and buried. I'm not a Jesus myther. If you guys want to talk about that afterwards, I'm happy to do that. But I believe Jesus actually lived and he died on a cross. But so what? Lots of people are executed on crosses all the time, even today. Did you know that? It's happening in many places in the world. This does not mean he rose from the grave. You could believe this and not be a Christian. You can believe that as an atheist. I did. I also would have said, okay, the tomb is empty. Like, no, duh. If you wanted to end this in the first century, get the body of Jesus and drag it around town. It's game over. That didn't happen because the tomb is empty. But that does not mean that Jesus rose from the tomb. I could explain that any number of other ways. You could believe this as an atheist. You could believe this and this as an atheist. I did. Doesn't make Christianity true. Well, one more thing. It does seem that they said they believed they saw him alive afterwards. So what? I mean, lots of people believe all kinds of stupid things. Doesn't make it true because you believe it. You can be sincere and sincerely wrong at the same time. So you can believe these three things as an atheist. I did. Last thing, okay, it does appear that they were changed afterwards. You know, they were willing to die for their claims. Look, I know people who are changed by watching Oprah Winfrey, okay? You're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks with Matt. This does not mean that what she says is true. Lots of people are transformed by all kinds of stupid things. Okay, I believe these are 4 pieces of evidence, though, that have to be explained. And I would say I can explain them in a non-Christian way. As a matter of fact, I can make a list of all the possible ways to explain this, and I think that there are 7 ways to explain this, and only one is the Christian way, this one. You can hold these and explain this stuff as an atheist. So I'm not going to go through all these with you. I'm going to go through a couple of them with you, though. And I'm going to send you the entire video of all the rest. But I want to at least show you what I went through my thinking process as I started to look. Because remember, in abductive reasoning, you got a dead guy and you got 4 explanations. And you start to cross out the explanations that don't work. Did the same thing here. I've got these 4 pieces of evidence, and I've got a list of explanations. Like, for example, how do we know that they were even... Maybe Jesus didn't even die on the cross. Think about that. Do you know how there's a science to executions, crucifixions? Did you know that? No one dies on a cross in just a few hours. It usually takes days, 3 to 4 days. You know why? Because you don't die of blood loss. You don't die of blunt force trauma. You die of asphyxiation. You cannot push up to catch your breath. You're exhausted and you suffocate on the cross. That's why, for example, in the Bible it says they broke the legs of people who were still alive, right? They want to why would that work? Because if you break the legs, they can't push up and they suffocate immediately. So suffocation is why people die on the cross. Well, you're telling me that Jesus was on that cross for just a few hours and you think he's dead? Maybe he's not dead at all. Maybe he just goes unconscious. He looks dead, but he's not dead. So when you get him off the cross, it's not a resurrection. It's just a resuscitation. I can make that case from your scripture. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the passage in John. It says that at the end of the day, Jesus was executed along with 2 other thieves, right? Well, when they came to get the bodies off the cross for the Sabbath, guess what they discovered? The 2 thieves, they weren't dead. They were still alive. That makes sense. Nobody dies in just a few hours on a cross. But then they come to Jesus and they think he's dead also? Why would they think that? As a matter of fact, they guaranteed that the thieves were dead. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first thief. Then they broke the legs of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, really, how do they know that? They didn't break his legs to make sure he was dead. This is my point. Couldn't he just look like he's dead? All they did was stick a spear in his side, and they brought forth a sudden flow of blood and water. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because there's some hidden science here in this verse that could tell you if Jesus is actually dead. Did you know that? It's in this expression right here, blood and water. Nobody could figure that out when John first wrote that. No early church father, no one in the Christian church understood what John was talking about here. They get it. Okay, you stick a spear, blood's going to come out. But why would there be water coming out of Jesus' body? So I went back and I read what every ancient church leader wrote about this passage. And I don't care who you read, nobody thinks it's water. They think it's a symbol. It's a symbol for the baptism. It's a symbol for the Holy Spirit. I don't care which church father you read. No one thinks it's really water. Well, why? Because why would water come out of his body? That makes no sense at all. It's got to be a symbol of something else. Unless, of course, there's a science here that can explain the water. And there is. In my job, occasionally we get to a location and someone is badly injured but hasn't died yet. And then we watch this poor guy die right in front of us. One of the very first calls I ever handled as a brand new officer, I was called out to a murder, and sure enough, he was alive when I got there, and as I stood there right in front of me, he died in front of me. That's still an unsolved case. That's a case I want to reopen because I thought it'd be kind of cool to be the first person to see it and the last person to close it, right? Separated by 30 years. But my point here is there's a hidden science here. When you see people are starting to die from that kind of blunt force trauma, they enter what's called circulatory shock, and if their heart fails, then they suffer one of two kinds of effusion. If your heart stops, the first kind of effusion is called pericardial effusion, and that's where the sac of water around your heart swells up. But it's not big enough to look like a separation of blood and water. It just isn't. I've been to coroner's offices where we've looked at this kind of thing, and it'll look like runny blood, but it won't look like a separation of blood and water, unless, of course, you happen to be in just the right position so that you don't suffer pericardial, but you suffer pleural effusion. Now you've got water that collects in your lungs. You'd have to be in an upright position, though. And then if that's the case and I stab your chest cavity, you will see a separation of blood and water. But that means you've already suffered the heart attack which caused you to die, which caused the pleural effusion. This is a hidden piece of science that demonstrates that Jesus was actually dead. And in case you're wondering if he's dead, I think the only reason why we wonder is because we aren't familiar with death. Now, how many of you work in an industry where you have to touch dead bodies every day? Raise your hand. There's always somebody. Okay, got it. You already know then that dead bodies do not look like unconscious bodies. Now, people in the regular world don't know that. But when I get to a crime scene, I can tell from across the room, that guy's dead. He's not laying there unconscious. He's dead. There is a difference. Now, you may not recognize that because every time you experience death in this culture, you call the coroner or you call a funeral home. And they will come and get your aunt and take your aunt away. You do not have to wrap your aunt up and bring her down to the funeral home. They come and get her, right? But that is not the case in the first century. In the first century, every single individual was familiar with how to deliver a baby and how to wrap up a dead body because there was no funeral home to call. There was no mortuary, no coroner's office to call. You took care of your own dead. Let me show you what that looks like. I'll take you down to the coroner's office in Los Angeles. Here it is. This is the kind of cool old building. It's been there for many, many years. If you walk up the front steps and you go over here, this window right here, that is the Los Angeles County Coroner's gift shop. Yeah. It's called Skeletons in the Closet. You can buy things there. You can buy T-shirts that say, "Our bodies of work speak for themselves." Or you can buy I don't know who even uses a mouse pad anymore, but they still sell this online. It says, "We're dying for your business." Yeah, I know, that's pretty tacky, isn't it? And if you go next door to this building, it's a big, long, white building. In the basement of that white building are the examination rooms. And I wish they looked like this. They don't look anything like this, okay? This might be how they looked the day the building was built, okay? But by the next day at 150 autopsies a day, they don't look like that anymore. And if you're a Los Angeles County and you're a homicide detective and you are assigned, you're the IO, the investigating officer on a homicide, you are going to have to go to the coroner's office for the autopsy. Because coroners do not testify in preliminary hearings. I have to testify for the coroner. That means I have to be there when they cut this guy up so I can testify to what the coroner did. So I have been at tons of autopsies. They are really weird things, I'll tell you right now, okay? It's weird how they take you apart if you die. There's no nobility in death, okay? It's a great equalizer. And when I started in 1988, these surfaces were not metal. They were wood. Think about that for a minute. Why do you think they're metal? Why do you think this grate is here? So you can wash them down, right? If they're wood, it doesn't take very long for it to sponge everything up, and it stinks in this room. It's always bloody. It always smells like death. We have suits that we wear just to the coroner's office. One suit, I keep it in plastic. I just wear that one suit to the coroner's office when I go to an autopsy. There's even a sign in this bloody mess, a sign on the back wall that says, "No eating in the examination room." I kid you not. Like someone's going to eat there, right? But people do. Now, I say all of this so I can teach you about the signs of death that I believe those who handled Jesus' body would have seen immediately. And in the first century, they would have known this was a sign of death, even though in the 21st century, we have no clue. It's called the mortis triad. These three inconvenient things happen to you when your heart stops pumping. The first thing that happens is you start to cool down. So dead people are cooler to the touch, right? Makes sense because that hot blood is not coursing through your veins anymore. But worse, by the way, that is called algor mortis. This is why it's called a mortis triad. You start to get stiff. That's called rigor mortis, and most of us are familiar with that. But also, you may not have thought of this, and it's a dead giveaway. No pun intended. Dead giveaway. That's actually pretty good. It's just a dead giveaway. Anyway, the point is, the third thing that happens is when you die and your heart stops pumping, the strongest force on your blood is no longer your heart, it's gravity. If you die on your back, gravity will pull the blood to your back. When I roll you over, you'll be black and blue or purple or reddish on your back because that's where all the blood has been drawn. If you are executed on a cross, you'll have feet that turn blue and purple and red because that's where the blood's going to go. That is called liver mortis. This is the mortis triad. So when someone says to me, "Jim, isn't it possible that Jesus was not dead on the cross?" I always say, yes, absolutely, because anything is possible. But it's not reasonable. And that's why I reject it. Make sense? We're determining here which is the most reasonable explanation. Hey, maybe they were lying about this. Maybe there's a conspiracy. A lot of us in this room, we love conspiracy theories, don't we? We love TV shows and books about conspiracy theories. And I'm here to tell you all right now, they're stupid, okay? So stop watching that stupid stuff, okay? Because no, seriously, you think you know of some vast conspiracy? Well, if you know about some conspiracy, some successful conspiracy that someone pulled off, by definition, it wasn't successful. A successful conspiracy are the ones you never hear about. You don't know about them. That's why they succeeded. Now, I'm not here to say you could never succeed in a conspiracy. You can, but I get to work these for a living. And I will tell you that if you want to be a good liar, you have to have 5 things in place. So, young people in the room, I am now going to teach you how to lie to your parents. Okay, how many young people in the room? Raise your hand if you're under 18. Okay, great. Do you have siblings? Okay, great. So I'm going to teach you and your siblings how to lie to your parents. Because if you're going to do a conspiracy, you need these 5 things. Are you ready? Not that hard. It's not rocket science, or I call it rocket surgery. It's not kind of mixed metaphor there. But here's what you need. These 5 things. First, think about this. Pretty common sense. You need the smallest possible number of co-conspirators. If you've got 4 siblings, do not involve all 4, just involve 1. 2 conspirators can lie and keep a secret better than 10, better than 4, better than 24. Make sense? Use the smallest number of siblings. So that's your first tip. Okay, got it. Number 2, hold the conspiracy for the shortest possible period of time. It's easier to tell a lie and keep a secret for a day than it is for a year. So the best thing you can do is after you do this little crime and you lie to your parents, you need to kill your sibling. Sorry, but that'll work because now there won't be any more conspiracy, right? It ended right away. I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just saying, you see how hard it is? Because what do? How long are you going to hold this before someone's going to catch you? A third thing you may not have thought about, but is true. You need to have great communication between you and your co-conspirator. Because at some point, one of your parents is going to jam you up. And they're going to want to know what happened. Well, you better be able to talk to your sibling to say, hey, I told him this. So he or she can say the exact same thing. Why do you think the first thing we do when we arrest 2 people, what do? We separate them. We want to eliminate their ability to talk to each other. Make sense? So communication is important. Fourth thing, if you are siblings, you'd hope you have a family relationship. But some of you guys have siblings you can't even stand. Do not do the crime with that sibling. Pick the one you like, the one who likes you. Because you got a better chance of getting away with it if you have a sibling relationship, a strong family tie. Last thing, ready? No pressure. If your parents don't ever ask, you're not going to get caught. So if you can avoid even being asked, low pressure leads to success. Now, what am I telling you these 5 things? Okay, well, if you're suggesting that the Christian narrative is a conspiracy, all of Scripture is a conspiracy between the disciples, well, if it is, to be successful, it would have had to have these 5 things. This is how every conspiracy succeeds. So think about that for a second. How many people are telling this lie? Is it just James and John and Peter? No. No, there's more than that. Is it just the 12? No, it's actually larger than that. In the upper room in Acts 1, when they're replacing Judas with Matthias, how many people are in the upper room, allegedly, who were available to see Jesus from the baptism to the resurrection? How many people are there? Yeah, it's too many. Not only that, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says there are 500 people that the Corinthian church could still interview, most of whom are still alive, who saw the risen Christ on the same day. That's way too big. So if all you told me right now, yeah, I think it's a conspiracy, Jim, how many people are involved? Over 500? I'm out. But let's go a little further. Let's play a game of Clue. Remember the old school Clue? How many guys played Clue when they were growing up? Okay. It doesn't even look this way anymore, does it? It's some stupid board now. I don't know what it is, okay? But that's the original board. If you're not playing on that board, you're not playing Clue, okay? But let's change the board just for the sake of our argument. We'll make it the area around where Jesus did his ministry. The game pieces will be the disciples. First part of our Clue game is simply this. First of all, there's way too many disciples. I'm already out. But if we go one more step, the next question will be, well, how long do they have to hold it? Remember, shorter is better. Is it 6 minutes? 6 hours? 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years? No, it's 6 decades. You want me to believe that over 500 people successfully kept this lie together, no one ever gave it up for 60 plus years? Okay. Now, the next thing we got to consider, though, well, maybe they could communicate with each other to keep the lie together. Really? Okay, they're not in this holy huddle here. They're all over the game board. So the question simply is, how are they communicating with each other? You don't think that when Thomas is being tortured in India, they're asking him questions? How can he communicate with Matthew or with John or with Paul? How is this happening? They can't Snapchat each other. They can't. How are you going to find out what you're saying to the other guy? This is the problem. You cannot communicate across these boundaries. 3 things are missing. Well, what kind of pressure are they under? If you've ever watched or played the game of Clue, you know that there are game pieces. They're always the little weapons, right? Did you ever watch 24 with Jack Bauer? See, some people like 24. Not the new 24, wherever that thing is a disaster, okay? The old 24, right? And you know Jack Bauer, if he had to get a confession, what would he do to get it? Whatever it took. That's what was happening to these folks. They were tortured, dismembered, quartered, tarred, executed upside down. A lot of pressure, way too much pressure. And finally, you know, there's some family groups in here. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, you got John and James and you got Andrew and Peter, but who is Matthew related to? Okay, Matthew's not even part of the discipleship of John the Baptist. He is a no one. He is a guy named Levi who's collecting taxes. He's no one's friend. Yet he is going to be tortured to death, but he still writes a gospel about what he saw. So look, in the end, I look at this and I'm thinking all 5 things you need for a successful conspiracy, all 5 are missing. So is it possible it's a conspiracy? Well, sure. Anything's possible. It's just not reasonable. Hey, maybe they hallucinated this. Let's go one more step with me. Maybe they hallucinated it. They were just delusional. You know, they wanted Jesus to be alive so badly that they imagined, and look at, you can kind of see that, right? You know, they're on the road and they think they meet somebody and then they think later, oh, it was Jesus. Why don't you recognize him right away? Why doesn't Mary recognize him right away? Maybe they just think they are imagining this because they want it so bad. I mean, think about the first interactions with Jesus. It's one person who's alone. She thinks it's the gardener. No, it's Jesus. No, Mary, it's the gardener. You just want it to be Jesus because you so desperately want Jesus to be alive. Couldn't you say the same thing about someone like Peter? Peter is by himself. He has a vision. It says in 1 Corinthians, also in Luke. I'm sure he felt bad. He wanted Jesus to be alive. Couldn't he have imagined this? I mean, James is the same way. He didn't seem to treat Jesus all that well when Jesus was alive. He has a single sighting, okay. He could have imagined this. But then you get to Paul, whose name is Saul. And he has a single vision of Jesus. No one else on the road sees it. But do you think he wants Jesus to be alive? How do you explain this one? I think that's tough. It gets worse. What do you do with multiple accounts where more than one person says they saw Jesus and reports it for years afterwards? So here on the road, we've got two who see Jesus at the same time. Look, if I told you I had a dream last night and I'm driving a Tesla down Mulholland Drive, and you said, yeah, it was a red Tesla, how do you know that? Because you're right, it was a red Tesla. And it had a beige rag top and you had the top down. Whoa, how would you know that? If you could tell me details of my dream, that would freak me out. Because we don't have group dreams, okay? When we have group things, we call those memories. And here we're having a group sighting. How do we explain group sightings? There's not a single piece of evidence in the history of psychology that can explain group sightings. And here we have one where there's 3 women who see the same thing. Here's one where 7 people on the lake see Jesus on the same day. Couldn't even get them all on the same screen. So I'll put 2 over here. There you go. Or here, for example, remember it was the disciples minus Thomas and minus Judas. Judas is not part of this group. Thomas is not first there. So now we have 10. 10 who see Jesus all at the same time. And then if you remember, Thomas re-enters the group, and when he does, we now have an additional person, so now we have 11. Too many people seeing the same thing. Also, remember at some point they're on the mountaintop, and there we don't know how many people are there. It's at least the 11, but it could be more according to the way it's written. So let's just count the 11 at least. We have more than one sighting in which more than one person is seeing Jesus. And then we have, this is, I think, the best of all, right? Here he is on the mountaintop, about to ascend into heaven. How many people are watching this? We don't know. At least the 11. Don't you agree? Even if you didn't believe Jesus was who he said he was, if you just encountered him for the first time on the day he ascended into heaven, if you saw him ascend into heaven, you would probably be a believer, right? You always say, show me a sign, show me a sign. On the day that Jesus ascended into heaven, if you had been there, you would have become a believer. Do you want to see it? Right now? For those of you who are still doubters and skeptics, do you want to see Jesus ascend into heaven? You ready? Here we go. Whoop. There you go. So now there should be no unbelievers in the room, right? Because we just showed you the miracle. But there are at least 11 there, probably more. Hey, remember that thing I told you about in 1 Corinthians? 500 people on the same day. Shall I count those for you? Here we go. Not bad. We got it. There you go. Okay. That's a lot of people. We're short, a little bit short. We'll add some. There you go. All of them now. We've got all those people. So look, if you wanted to falsify this, if you don't think that's a real vision of Jesus, just go back to the tomb. If it's just a vision, there'll be a body in the tomb, right? But if you're having these visions and you go back to the tomb and the tomb is empty, now I got a problem. This is rolling back into conspiracy theory, right? Because someone's stolen the body. In the end, I don't even think, this is why Peter says things in Scripture, and so does John, things that sound like this. Hey, we aren't making this stuff up. It's not our little clever story. We just happened to see it and touch it and hear his voice, and we knew it was him. We're just witnesses of this stuff. They're not making it up. So is it possible that they were delusional? Sure. For the sake of argument, sure. But it's not reasonable. Now I'm going to skip through these last 3 and go to yours now, and we'll end it. Because I could go through all these with you, and I'll send you that video. But this is your description, your explanation for what happened. Christians just think that this is an accurate description in the Gospels of the resurrection of Jesus. Okay. So is that the case? Well, all right, I'll give you this. If it just happened the way that's reported in the Gospels, the Christian explanation does explain those 4 pieces of evidence we started with better than any other explanation. I will give you that. But your explanation has got a problem. These all have problems, no doubt. I think these have deal-killing problems. These don't work. But your explanation also has a problem. For me as an atheist, it certainly did. And here it was. If you want me to believe in your Christian explanation, I have to accept that something supernatural happened, that Jesus actually rose from the grave. If you want me to accept your explanation, I have to believe in a resurrection. No way, I'm out. Seriously? I was what was called a philosophical naturalist. I believed if you couldn't explain it with space, time, matter, and physics, it doesn't happen. That was always my view. So if you want me to believe that something supernatural happened, that's not history, guys. That's not history. When you insert supernatural explanations into history, you are now in a different category, a different genre. It's called mythology. So I was out. You don't do science with supernatural explanations. You don't do history with supernatural. But wait a minute, Jim. Isn't the thing that we are investigating this question? Whether or not supernatural events are ever reasonable. That's what we're examining. The resurrection is a supernatural event. So that's what we're studying here. We're trying to figure out, could that have actually happened? Is that the most reasonable explanation? You want to start that study, start that investigation by assuming up front that no miracles could ever happen, that nothing supernatural ever happens. Well, then how can you investigate this? That's the thing you're investigating. You cannot start the investigation thinking you know the answer. Suspend your doubt for a little bit, because if you don't do that, if you are so committed that nothing supernatural happens, well, then I can show you a piece of evidence how early these accounts are dated. I don't care. I don't believe in supernatural events. I don't believe in resurrections. Well, I can show you another piece of evidence. Oh, I don't care. You'll jump over that one too. I can show you the archaeological confirmation of many of the New Testament accounts. I don't care. I don't believe in that kind of stuff either. And then no matter what I show you, you will find a way to jump over it and return to your initial position. And why are you so stubborn about this? It's because this is where you started. And you do not want to move. That kind of thinking does not get you to a conclusion, really, because you've already thought up front that you had the answer. Why do you think I showed you that picture? Why? These officers thought they had the answer before they started. And they came to the wrong conclusion on the basis of their presuppositional bias. Their worldview, their way they viewed this woman, did not allow them to think anything else. So when it comes down to the question about what happened to Jesus, you really only have one of two possible answers, right? Either he rose from the dead or he didn't. That's it. Oh, Jim, keep your mind open. He could have risen from the dead supernaturally. Really? I'd have to consider all explanations to get over here, including the supernatural ones. Sorry, no, I don't do that. I got a roadblock. I don't believe in the supernatural. I can only accept naturalistic explanations. Oh, really? If we're going to stay with just naturalistic explanations, I could offer all of them, and none of them work. These all stand in the way. I didn't care. I would find a way to jump over these, go around them, ignore certain things, go under them. I was committed to getting over here. It didn't matter to me whether these even work. I just liked the conclusion. Make sense? Now just take a look at this for a second. Which of these two pathways is less encumbered? Which one? This one. And guess what? This obstacle that's there in the path, I put it there. It doesn't even need to be there. I'm the only reason why there's an obstacle in that path, because I don't believe in the supernatural. I can't control what's wrong with all these explanations. These all stink on their own, okay? I don't make them stinky. They already stink on their own. This, I put there. I could easily pull it down. This is about a worldview which rejected the supernatural. Does that make sense? Now, if you simply lay down your presuppositional bias, look what happens. I mean, this is by far the easiest and most direct explanation. So at some point, I want to encourage all of you that are in the room or that are dealing with people who don't believe this is true to remember that sometimes the only thing standing between you or standing between somebody you love and the truth is you or the person you love. The only thing that was standing between me and the cross was me. This is about being fair with your presuppositional biases, with the things you think you know before you've ever even looked. Does that make sense? Now, worldview is a term that is kind of confusing for a lot of people, but it's simply the way you view the world. Do you believe in anything supernatural? Look, I as an atheist believe that everything came into existence from nothing. This is called Big Bang cosmology. All space, time, and matter leapt into existence from nothing. There was no space, time, or matter prior to that event called a singularity, a cosmic singularity. Everything comes into existence from nothing. That was my view as an atheist. That means then that whatever starts that has to be incredibly powerful, and it cannot be made up of space, time, or matter. That means I'm looking for an incredibly powerful, non-spatial, non-material, non-temporal first cause. What does that sound like? So here's my point. I already believed there was something extranatural. So once I realized I was stuck in that position, why couldn't that extranatural thing be a being rather than an impersonal force? If there's a being that starts everything from nothing, that's pretty powerful. That's a crazy miracle. That's the most important miracle in all of Scripture, and it's in Genesis 1. If there's something like that out there, I'm guessing he could probably walk on water. I'm guessing he could probably rise from the grave. Everything else was small potatoes. Make sense? Now, we're about to continue next week in this series that Matt has put together. And I think sometimes what happens is, if you've been in the same place for a long time, you start to take it for granted. Don't you think? I mean, I get a chance to walk in this church. It's been a couple of years since I was here. And I'll bet a lot of you maybe were raised in this church, or you've been in this church for a long time. It's really easy to take something for granted. Next week, you're going to start a series. And this is a series that I hope you won't take for granted. Because very few churches in Ohio are even looking at the evidence on a weekly basis for why this is true. But I will tell you this. If you aren't sure that this is true, good luck standing through a trial. Good luck with your students getting through university. You already know, there's already stories in this room of young people who have left the church, and you are the remaining family. You already know you've got those stories. Didn't have to be that way. We have to be a church that knows the evidence. That makes sense? And you happen to be in a great place to learn it. So don't miss the opportunity to learn about Jesus in this series. That makes sense? Now, I'm going to send to you everything. And here's our website. I've got a page that's hidden for you. And you've got to sign up for it, though, to get all the materials. I'm going to send you the PDF files of this talk, the video of this talk. You're going to be able to download it and keep it. Look at all 7 explanations, all the MP3s. I've got books, but you don't need to buy a book. I'm going to send this stuff to you. And you're going to get it at this hidden page. I set it up just before I came up here. It's just for your church for this weekend. As a matter of fact, if you write this down right now, I'm going to take this down tomorrow at noon. So it'll be up tonight. It'll be up tomorrow till noon. When I get to the airport, I'm going to take it down, and I'm going to send you the materials. You'll have the materials by tomorrow afternoon. Okay? But I just want to encourage you to learn the case. Look, folks, cops have a bad habit of seeing the entire world in stark categories, right? There's sheep and there are wolves. There are. There are sheep and there are wolves in culture and in the church. Now think about that for a second. What are we described by Jesus? How does he describe us? Sheep. Is that a compliment? No, that's not a compliment, because sheep are dumb. Okay, they are. They have no idea they're being picked off by wolves. There's another animal in the yard. It's called a sheepdog. Sheepdogs are in place to protect sheep from wolves. We need all of us to turn the corner from sheep to sheepdog so we can protect our own kids in a culture that is filled with wolves. And if you want to do that, you have to know why this is true. Your kids are going to ask you before they're ever going to read some stupid book from me. They don't want my book. They want to know if mom and dad have a good answer. You have to be the best apologist your kids will ever know. Let's pray. Father, we love you and we want to be used by you. Would you help us to become the kind of defenders, the kind of ambassadors for you we're supposed to be? Would you help us to not be lazy, to realize we have to take a step of trust, a step of a little bit of work, and become the kind of Christian you want us to become. We pray this in the name of your precious Son, and I pray for the brothers and sisters here at Christ Community Church. Thank you for just joining us together as a family. Pray this all in Jesus' name, and everyone here says, Amen. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Please thank Jim for coming all the way from L.A. to come and share with us.
Christ Community meets on Saturday at 5 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. For more information, visit www.christcommunity.net. or check out our Facebook page.